Hi, this is Jace with Popcorn Recap. Today I'll be talking about a supernatural horror film called The Others. It's about a woman that wakes up one day and finds her family haunted by ghosts. In 1945, when the Second World War is coming to an end, Grace Stewart lives with her two children in a mansion in Britain. She's waiting for her husband to come back from war. Grace is a strong-minded, resilient, and faithful Christian. She believes everything in the Bible and reads it with her children regularly. One morning, Grace wakes up screaming and finds everything in the mansion is different. All the servants are missing. She steps out of the house and finds herself surrounded by a heavy mist, and she can't see anything. Grace decides to hire new servants and posts an ad in the paper. She's surprised to get a fast response and found 3 people applying for the job the next day. An old-aged woman, Mrs. Mills, a young girl, Lydia, and an old-age male, Mr. Tuttle, come to the mansion for a job. The 3 tell Grace that they have been working together for years, and they are diligent and honest people. Grace accepts the new servants and gives them a tour of the house. She then tells them that her children are sensitive to sunlight, and they should always keep the curtains and doors closed. Grace then takes the new servants to meet her children, Anne and Nicholas. During breakfast the next day, Anne asks their new nanny if she would also leave without saying goodbye one day. Mrs. Mills asks what happened to the previous servants, and Anne answered that their mother went mad. Nicholas stops Anne from revealing too much. Then Grace interrupts. Grace discovers that her letter for the newspaper ad was still in her mailbox. She realized that her new servants came to work at the mansion without seeing the ad. She confronts Mrs. Mills, and the nanny explains that they were passing by the house and tried their luck. The nanny then adds that they worked in the mansion many years ago. She says that they missed their time working there, and that's why they came back. Although puzzled, Grace decides to keep the servants, because their explanation sounded reasonable enough. She then asks if the young housekeeper Lydia was born mute. The old nanny replies no, and quickly leaves for other housework. One day, Grace hears a child crying, so she hurries and checks on her children. She is baffled after that because she finds that her children are all right. Anne then says that the crying sound came from a boy named Victor. She adds that Victor was crying because his family is moving in, and he didn't like the place. Believing that Anne was daydreaming, Grace scolds the child and tells her to stop lying. Anne points out that Victor went through the door, and Grace says he can't since it's locked, but it appears Anne was right. It was open. That night, Anne wakes Nicholas and tells him that Victor was inside their room. She says that Victor is the one that opened their curtains. Scared of seeing a ghost, Nicholas desperately closes his eyes. To make her brother believe in her, Anne asks Victor to touch his brother's face. Nicholas then screams, and that alarms his mother and their nanny. The next day, Grace decides to punish Anne and forces her to read the Bible. Anne insists that she wasn't lying and that Victor was there with them. Grace is fed up and tells Anne that bad children end up in limbo. Anne says she can't end up in limbo since she's already been baptized. Grace ignores the child's explanation and continues to punish her. Sometime later, Grace hears loud noises coming from a room upstairs. Feeling annoyed, Grace decides to scold the servants for making the noise. She then walks near the window and sees the servants talking outside. Surprised, Grace decides to go upstairs to check who made the noise. On her way upstairs, Grace asks Anne who was making the noise. The child refuses to answer in fear of being punished again. Grace then begs Anne to tell her what was going on, and the child replies that someone was in the storage room. Grace goes to the storage room. She hears whispers and finds that they have been opening and closing the doors. Anne tells her the ghosts plan on getting rid of the curtains. The next day, Anne drew a picture of the people she saw. Grace sees the boy Victor, his parents, and an old-aged woman in the drawing. The number indicates how many times she's seen them. Apparently, the old woman says she's a witch. Believing that there were intruders in the house, Grace grabs her gun and asks the servants to help her search every corner of the mansion. They didn't find any intruders during their search. Moments later, Grace finds an album from a closet in the storage room. She wonders why the people in the photos have their eyes closed. The nanny then explains that the individuals in the portraits are all dead. She adds that in the last century, photographing dead people was a popular way to help their souls find paradise. Grace then gives the album to the nanny and tells her to throw it away. The nanny then reveals that they were among the servants hired by a family in the album that occupied the mansion years ago. She then says that the family that hired them died because of tuberculosis. The nanny then says they returned to the mansion because they missed working there. Grace asked once again if the young housekeeper was born a mute. The nanny answered that they didn't know why the housekeeper suddenly lost her speech. Grace thinks it must have been due to some traumatic event. One evening, Grace hears the piano playing but finds no one when she inspects it. When she opens the door to leave the piano room, it suddenly pushes back. The door slams on her as she applies more force, and she falls to the floor as a result. Grace believes there are ghosts in the house because of the incident. The nanny then tells her that the world of the living and the dead sometimes overlap, and they feel each other's existence during that time. Grace decides to get a priest to bless the house. She enters the fog to find a priest in town. Meanwhile, the gardener gathers falling leaves in the yard and covers something. After seeing Grace go far away, he then points to 3 piles of leaves and asks when they should reveal the truth to her. The nanny says, soon. Grace finds herself lost in the deep grove because of the heavy mist. She then hears footsteps and a figure of a man approaching her. To her surprise, the figure she sees turns out to be Charles, the husband she has been waiting for all this time. Grace bursts into tears and holds her husband. She then tells him that she has been waiting and prayed every night to God for his return. Charles then explained that he was looking for a way home all this time and was lost. Unfortunately, the trials for their family weren't over yet. Charles is sick, and all he did was lie in bed all day. He didn't eat in the dining room or play with his children. He just stares out of their bedroom window, and that depresses Grace. One day, Anne talks about the intruders again and quarrels with Grace because she didn't believe her. The nanny consoles Anne after being punished by her mother. She shares that she had also seen the intruders and that her mom would soon learn the truth. Later that night, Grace tries to smooth things over with Anne by helping her try on a new evening dress. Loving the dress a lot, Anne didn't want her to take it off. While urging her to take off the dress, Grace sees Anne's hands become wrinkled, and her face is now of an old-aged woman with blind eyes. Terrified, Grace grabs her by the neck and fiercely rocks her. She then pulls the veil off Anne and finds that she is back to normal. The child is frightened of her mom and runs to the nanny seeking help. She is screaming that Grace wants to kill everyone and is evil. Later, Grace and Charles talk. He asks what she did to their children that day. Grace is confused and tells him that she has no idea. All she knows is that she woke up that day and found all of her servants were missing. She then clarifies that even if she was being rough with the children, she loves them and is willing to give her life for them. Charles then stands up and tells Grace that he only came home to say goodbye. After learning that he is leaving for the war again, Grace falls apart. She says that the war is over and that he should stay with his family instead. In the morning, Grace wakes up and finds Charles is gone. One day, the children wake up and find all of the curtains are missing. Fearing the light, they find themselves trembling. Grace is furious at the servants for not telling her what is going on. They try to tell her that she should try exposing her kids to the sunlight. In her rage, Grace grabs her gun and drives the servants away. While walking out of the mansion, the servants agree that it is not time to reveal the truth to Grace. On that night, Anne convinces her brother to jump out of the window and look for their dad outside. While they are at the yard, the children find 3 tombs amidst piles of leaves. After closer inspection, Anne sees the servants' names carved on the tombstone. Shortly after that, they see the servants approaching and decide to run back into their house. Meanwhile, Grace searches for the curtains when she finds a portrait of dead people again. She looks at it again and is shocked that it is the portrait of the servants. Grace covers her mouth after realizing that the servants were dead all along. She then hears the children scream, so she grabs her gun and goes to them. Grace tells her children to hide and then fires a warning shot at the 3 servants. The 3 servants ignore the warning shot and continue walking towards Grace. Grace abandons her gun, goes inside the house, and locks the doors. The servants then try convincing her that both the living and the dead should live in harmony. Confused and terrified, Grace sits on the stairs and begs the dead servants to leave them alone. The nanny then tells her that even if they left, the other ghosts in the house won't. The gardener then says that those ghosts were the ones that made the noises and removed the curtains. Anne and Nicholas are hiding inside the wardrobe when they see an old-aged woman open it and tell them to follow. Grace then starts to panic and looks upstairs after hearing her children scream. The nanny then says that the only thing Grace could do is talk to the ghosts. Afraid, Grace prays and goes upstairs. She opens the door and sees a table with a group of people. One of them is an old-aged woman with white hair and blind eyes, the one in Anne's drawing. She turns out to be a psychic, and she asks the children what their mom did to them. Anne looks at Grace with frightened eyes and whispers what happened to the old lady. The psychic then draws on paper while listening to Anne. She then shows the drawing to a man sitting beside her, and he said that the incident was related to a pillow. The psychic understands what happened to the children. She reveals that their mother killed them using a pillow. She then asks them why they were still in the house, even if they were already dead. Anne is in disbelief. Anne and Nicholas say they're not dead, and an angry Grace shakes the table and tears the paper into pieces. All the other people around the table could see is paper being torn to pieces in midair and a shaking table. At this point, it is clear that Grace and her children are the ghosts in the mansion, and not the other way around. The wife is furious and doesn't want to live in a ghost-infested house. She doesn't want to be around a ghost who murdered her own children and then shot herself. She says, think of their son Victor, as he constantly sees the ghost of the daughter and how the ghost even possessed the psychic. The dad decides to leave the next day. Sometime later, Grace holds her frightened children in her arms. She then remembers everything that happened before the day when she woke up screaming. She recalls how she killed her children and took her own life. Grace ponders what is next for them. It is then that the nanny tells Grace that they were trying to tell her the truth about her family. She then continues to say that while the current mansion owners are leaving, others would come. She adds that their only option is to learn to get along with the humans. Grace and her children now understand that they were part of the other world. They were in limbo. They no longer had a reason to fear the sunlight. Outside, Victor and his family drive away, and a sign is placed on the door indicating that the mansion is for sale. What would you do if you were in the same situation as Grace? Will you accept your fate peacefully or be a vengeful ghost? Let us know in the comments below. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications and leave a like. It really helps the channel.